So let's talk about utility skills in Guild Wars 1. So what is a utility skill? A utility skill is a skill that helps you do something that isn't control or damage, and generally it has to do with like maintenance and function of your team. And by function, I mean it mechanically does something that other skills can't do. So in the case of my build, I have two utility skills. I have Death's Charge and I have Ward Against Foes. Death's Charge lets me teleport to a foe, and that's great on a Starburst build because I need to get to touch range, like to point blank range, to use these spells on the foe. So Death's Charge lets me get to them instantly. Also on my staff, I have a 20% chance to reduce the recharge, so it can actually put Death's Charge on a 15-second cooldown 20% of the time, which is pretty nice. I also have Ward Against Foes, which can be used to like slow enemies down. It cannot be removed once it's active, so I can teleport to a whole group of enemies and then slow them all down, which is nice. So as they're approaching my team can kind of just like kite them. So that's one of the main like reasons to run Ward Against Foes. You can also run it on a backliner, so that like for example, if I put this down and enemies enter this ward, like let's say I have my team flagged like here, the enemies have to move through this, and AI will not like run around it. They'll run straight through it. So enemies cannot really recognize when they're in a ward. They kind of just stand in it. They don't really care. So you can actually position your team so that an enemy has to run through an entire ward against foes in order to get to your team, which mitigates damage passively because they're not taking the damage because of the increased time to get to your teammates. So these are the utility skills in my bar. I'm going to go over some utility skills in my heroes bars just to kind of like, I'll go through like the other character, the like aggressive casters first. So, all right, so let's look at my warriors bar. So this is a factions only playthrough. I'm limited to factions and core skills and one of each profession. So in this case, I have my warrior running earth magic because it's much stronger, like given this rule set. This account only has factions, so this is literally like a meta build for this circumstance. Like this is really good. This is a good build. So the utility skills, there are three. Earth Attunement just helps it manage energy, helps the warrior manage energy. Glyph of Lesser Energy can help manage energy as well by reducing their cost, or if the warrior just has 5 energy left, the fight's going on for a long time, it can just use its 5 energy to then cast 2 10 energy spells for free, which can be quite useful. And then, of course, there is Resurrection Signet, which just resurrects a dead party member, and it only recharges when you get a morale boost. So Res Sig is good because it's just a quick resurrection like skill, but you can't really, like, there's no warrior or elementals res skills that are reusable, so that's why that's on here. So the 3 utility skills are both to manage energy and then finally to resurrect a dead dude. So let's go to the next one. All right. So this one has, I would say, 3 pure utility skills. The first one is Ward Against Melee. It creates a ward that just allows allies to have a 50% chance to block, which essentially halves enemy melee damage. So that's good. And then it has the same Earth Attunement for energy management. And then the last utility skill is Comfort Animal, which both gives you a pet and reses a pet. So there are other utility-ish skills, like for example, Scavenger Strike gives you energy back if target foe has a condition, but that falls under like a hybrid category I'm going to cover in another video. So let's go to the Mesmer. So this Mesmer has, I would say, 2 utility skills. Well, actually 3. So you might think like Psychic Instability is a shutdown skill that falls under control. So that is a form of utility, but I'm like trying to like look at utility as more of like management and maintenance, while control and shutdown are like a completely different category. So Shatter Hex comes to mind because it removes a hex, and then it also deals some damage on hex removal, but it's a utility skill because it removes a hex. And then we have Blood of the Master, which heals your minions. So that's like a maintenance skill that helps heal minions. Then, of course, you have Res Sig, which, as I already discussed earlier, just resurrects a dude. And then we have my assassin. Okay, so this has a few. So return is definitely a utility skill because you teleport away from foes and cripple them. So that's like a kind of escape, like mitigation skill to like prevent itself from getting spiked by enemy melee in hard mode. You have Shatter Hex, just like the other Mesmer has. And then you also have two very big utility skills. So Shared Burden hexes target foe and all foes near your foe, and it makes them move, attack, and cast 50% slower. So this is like one of the biggest examples of like a super powerful utility skill. It is kind of like a shutdown skill in a way, but it's more of like function. Like shutdown to me is like disabling enemies. So that's like part of control, which is a form of utility, but it's like offensive utility. Shared burden is like mitigation, and same thing with Arcane Conundrum. It doubles spellcasting time on target foe and adjacent foes for quite a while. So these two skills are very strong in hard mode because they help mitigate damage. So this is like a perfect example of like a utility bar. And then of course everyone's favorite utility skill in the game, Blood is Power. This skill allows energy inefficient builds, like even my build doesn't even have good energy management because like now that I have a BIP, who needs it? BIP lets you basically forego energy management in a team comp, and as long as the BIP is alive throughout the fight, it'll constantly just manage your party's energy. So it's a very good utility skill, probably one of the best in the game. I also have another utility skill, Weapon of Shadow. Just makes it so that when a foe hits this ally, that they get blinded, and then the ally's attacks also inflict blind, but that's like that's not as useful. Then, of course, you have Flesh of My Flesh, which is known as a hard res. It's just a resurrection skill that can be used more than once. It's also low energy cost, and it's quite fast at 4 seconds, which is not bad. You lose half your health, so they get rezzed with roughly 50% health and some energy. So that's another good utility skill. Generous with Sungrai is a utility skill as well because it both increases your maximum health while the hero is holding it, and it lets them drop it to spike their health. So in this case, even though it's just healing, which isn't necessarily utility in of itself, it kind of pairs with Blood is Power. So as they're spiking down their health, they can spike it up on demand as well. And then they also have some healing, but that's part of like healing, which is managing health. So you could consider that utility. I don't really. Then here's the biggest one, Soul Twisting. This is like one of the big utility builds that people run. So Soul Twisting makes binding rituals recharge instantly. It also makes them cost less energy, but it has a minimum that it can reduce them to 10. So that's not bad, especially when paired with Boon of Creation. Basically, every single skill on this bar is a utility skill. Soul Twisting recharges things faster. Shelter mitigates damage your party takes. Union mitigates damage your party takes. Earthbind increases the knockdown duration by 1 second. Armor of Unfeeling reduces the damage your spirits take, which is all of these spirits. So they use these spirits, they spam them with Soul Twisting, they reduce the damage they take with Armor of Unfeeling. Every time they create a spirit, they get healed and gain energy. They have a signet that can spike their energy up if needed, if a fight's going on for too long or the BIP dies for some reason, and they have a hard res. So this build is literally pure utility. Most team comps run a Soul Twister, but it's not a fun build to run because all you're doing is just like making sure your party doesn't wipe, and not even in like a healing way where you're like actively healing. You're just like kind of standing out of combat. Like usually you would put like a Soul Twister, like you can have them out of combat. You can have them like pretty far away. Like the effective range of spirits is like roughly this in a circle. So like it actually might be like around here. So you can just be hanging out as a Soul Twister, and that's all you'd be doing if you wanted to play as that, but it's quite boring. But this is a great build that's literally nothing but raw utility. And then we have Monks. So this is a kind of interesting build. It's like a standard like Life Sheath with some changes. So I would say Prot is mostly like every skill has utility. Like Healing Prayers has low utility but high healing, like the best healing. But Prot has decent healing and high utility. So in the case of Life Sheath, It prevents damage, converts it to healing, and removes 2 conditions on a 2-second cooldown, which is crazy. Spirit Bond like prevents spikes. If you get Spirit Bonded in hard mode, you're usually going to survive like a huge spike from a ton of enemies. It just spam heals you, and it's a good way of just keeping health up. Shield Guardian heals all allies in earshot, and whenever any ally gets hit, they block an attack essentially, and then it ends. But it heals everyone, so it can heal. It can proc 8 times and just heal everything in earshot, so that's great. But it also is utility because it can block an attack for each party member. Deny Hexes removes hexes. Divine Intervention is basically a don't die now, instantly interrupt type of thing, where you just like quickly enchant someone when they're right about to die, and it just negates death. So that's a pretty big utility skill. Divine Boon just increases healing on protection prayers, so that's like an efficiency thing. It does cause -1 energy degen to maintain, and you lose energy when you heal things. But with a BIP, that's negligible. And then, of course, you have Dark Escape for taking half damage and moving faster. Dark Escape is fantastic. It's one of the best utility skills for runners and for general hard mode. Taking half damage is insane. Like it's as long as you don't hit with an attack. If you're a spellcaster, you can run this on any caster. It's really good for that. And then, of course, you have Escape, just teleport away and cripple dudes. So, all right, we'll go over one more. I think actually that's all the builds really. So that's all. All right. So to recap, every team comp needs utility. Even if you think you don't, you probably do. Like you need mitigation, you need healing, you usually need control. You definitely need control and damage, and you always need utility because without utility, you'll die. Quite frankly, like you'll just die unless you're doing easy content. If you're doing really difficult content, you probably you should run it. Like unless you're running a bunch of players, like a bunch of players, or like you're in a team comp with a bunch of players, you probably need utility in your team comp. Generally speaking, like you can't get away with not running it in most situations unless you're running like some really weird speed clear thing. But in that case, they usually run utility and speed clears anyways. But this video was just to give an overview of types of skills for like new and returning players, and like to kind of introduce a way of thinking about the game. So like when you look at a skill and you're evaluating it, you can look at it and think, okay, what does this do? How is this useful? Where can I use this? So in the case of War Against Foes, I'm just kind of like slowing down all these dudes as they're like moving around, which makes them like less efficient and can also mitigate damage, which is useful because mitigating damage means you don't die, especially in hard mode, which is, you know, everything deals tons of damage. So that's the purpose of these videos, is to like start like a kind of dialogue, like a way of thinking about the game and a way of like breaking things down. So I'm going to go over like damage skills, healing skills, and control skills in their own videos. So I'll see you in those ones, and thanks for checking this out.